and grew up eating what I thought was a healthy diet. Until
World Health Organization this morning has classified processed meat such as bacon and sausage as carcinogenic, directly involved in causing cancer in humans.
Processed meat is clearly linked to an increase in cancer.
Hot dogs or bacon could be just as dangerous as smoking cigarettes.
the World Health Organization had looked at over 800 studies from 10 different countries, finding a direct link to consuming processed meat and cancer. Just one serving of deli meats daily increases your risks of colorectal cancer by 18%. I had no idea that what we ate affected cancer rates, but I never felt like I had eaten a lot of processed meats until I realized that processed meat includes hot dogs, bacon, sausage, salami, ham, pepperoni, cold cuts, and deli slices. Basically everything I grew up eating. The World Health Organization classifies processed meat as a Group 1 carcinogen, the same group as cigarettes, asbestos, and plutonium, and classifies red meat as a Group 2 carcinogen. Was this like I had essentially been smoking my entire childhood? If processed meats are labeled the same as cigarettes, how is it even legal for kids to be eating this way? I thought this was new information, but many of these studies have been around for 50 years. I couldn't believe I'd been eating processed meats virtually my entire life and was just now finding out how dangerous they are. Why hadn't I been hearing about it from the American Cancer Society, the largest cancer group in the nation? When I went on their website, I was shocked to see that none of this information was featured on their homepage. But even more shocking, on their Eat Healthy page, they actually encouraged eating Group 1 carcinogenic foods like processed turkey and canned meats. This is after the World Health Organization reviewed over 800 studies definitively linking processed meat to cancer.
Thank you for calling your American Cancer Society. My name is Sam. I'm a cancer information specialist. How may I help you today?
Hi, I was calling because I was wondering why you all recommend people to eat processed meat on your website, which the World Health Organization has classified as a Group 1 carcinogen, which is in the same class as tobacco smoking, asbestos, and plutonium. This would be like a lung association having a how to roll your own cigarette section on their website. It's kind of the same thing.
But let me just place you on a brief hold because
He wasn't able to answer my questions and said someone would get back with me.
Diabetes, the arthritis, the heart disease, the dementia, the obesity, the cancers are affecting about 70% of deaths. All the data is that those 70% of deaths and morbidity are largely lifestyle related and preventable.
You're taking medicine, you're listening to this doctor, and the cardiologist says take this, and the endocrinologist says take that, then your general practitioner doctor says you don't know what's going on here.
Government and media almost exclusively blame lack of exercise and sugary foods as a cause of diabetes. But I wanted to talk with an actual expert on the role of diet and diabetes. I went to speak with premier physician, diabetes expert, and researcher Dr. Neil Barnard. What role does sugar play in causing diabetes?
It drives me crazy. Diabetes is not and never was caused by eating a high carbohydrate diet, and it's not caused by eating sugar. The cause of diabetes is a diet that builds up the amount of fat into the blood. I'm talking about a typical meat-based, animal-based diet. You can look into the muscle cells of the human body and you find that they're building up tiny particles of fat that's causing insulin resistance. What that means is the sugar that is naturally from the foods that you're eating can't get into the cells where it belongs. It builds up in the blood, and that's diabetes.
I had never heard that meat was associated with causing diabetes. We had always been told that sugar or obesity caused it. Renowned weight loss bariatric surgeon Dr. Garth Davis, though, agreed.
Everyone thinks that you get diabetic because of carbs. They did a huge study in that EPIC study, 500,000 people. Carbs consumption was inversely related with diabetes. In other words, the more carbs someone ate, the less diabetes they had. But meat was strongly correlated. Get that aha moment. The starches, the carbs are good for you. They're not bad for you. This idea that carbs make you fat is utterly ridiculous. Carbs cannot make you fat in and of themselves. We have storage in our muscles and in our liver for carbs called glycogen. So when we eat carbs, we either store it or we burn it. Now, eat fat, that goes straight to your fat. Your body can't turn those carbs into fat unless you're really overdoing the calories. Obesity, it's a death sentence. You're at much higher risk of getting cancer. You're almost certainly going to get diabetes. I mean, no one wants to fat shame, and we all want everybody to be comfortable with our bodies, but this movement to be comfortable with our bodies has made us comfortable with being sick. And that's a huge problem. I go into the hospital and I look around me, people on dialysis, all these sick people, and just about every disease in there is because of what people are eating.
Here's the thing. If I eat a sugary cookie, the sugar lures you in like the Trojan horse, but waiting inside that cookie is a huge load of butter or shortening, and that's what fattens you up. And that's the part that leads to the diabetes. It's the fatty foods, not really so much the sugar.
It's not that sugar is good for you. There's no nutrients in it. It's excess calories. But when you eat sugar, you don't get inflammation right away. When you eat sugar, you're not getting plaques forming in your vessels. When you're eating sugar, your body's going to store most of it as glycogen or burn it as calories. And so this focus on sugar has taken all the focus off meat, dairy, eggs, pork, turkey, chicken.
People need to understand, if their child gets diabetes, you've just taken 19 years off their lifespan. We're talking life and death.
I realized there was so much more about diet and disease that I hadn't ever learned. It felt as if this information had been practically withheld. Processed meat causes cancer. Sugar doesn't cause diabetes. I had doubt about the claims these doctors were making, so I did some searching on my own. Harvard researchers looked at 9 prospective studies finding that just one serving of processed meat per day increased risk of developing diabetes by 51%. The link between eating meat and developing diabetes became undeniable. But when I went on the leading diabetes organization's website, the American Diabetes Association, not only did they not have this information front and center, they were featuring recipes for red and processed meat. And on their recipes for healthy living, they had bacon-wrapped shrimp? What the hell?
When we eat these kind of dead meat bacteria toxins, within minutes, you get this burst of inflammation within your system such that you basically paralyze your arteries. You get this stiffening of the arteries, their inability to relax normally in half. So it's not like decades down the road eating unhealthy, there'll be some damage. No, we're talking damage right then and there within minutes of it going into our mouth.
Many people are given the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease when it's not true Alzheimer's at all. The vast majority of people suffer dementia due to their tiny blood vessels in their brain clogging up and their nerve cells being shortchanged of oxygenated blood. And guess where that blood vessel dementia comes from? Those little tiny arteries are clogging up from that steady stream of fat, cholesterol, etc.
It's really quite clear from the standpoint of cancer and the standpoint of cardiovascular disease that animal protein plays an enormous role.
Is chicken better?
It's a question of whether you want to be shot or hung.
The flesh food that I would eliminate from the American diet would be poultry, would be turkey and chicken. A brilliant advertising campaign has convinced people that, oh, it's white meat, it's healthier.
The leading source of sodium in the American diet for adult is chicken. It can be labeled all natural chicken, but be injected with this salt water, I think up to 800 milligrams of sodium.
Heterocyclic amines are clear-cut carcinogens, and they can form in any kind of meat as it's heated, as it's cooked. But by far the biggest source is chicken. We sent researchers into fast food and family restaurants. Not only were there carcinogens in every single restaurant, but we found them in every single chicken sample that we took. If somebody brings their family in and they're buying a bucket of chicken, nobody tells them that there are carcinogens. If you're selling carcinogens to people, you've got to warn them that they're in there.
But the American Cancer Society encourages people to switch from red and processed meat to chicken. Why would the American Cancer Society tell people to switch from eating one carcinogenic food to another when a Harvard University study showed that men with prostate cancer who eat large amounts of chicken increase their risk of the disease progressing 4 times?
The number one dietary source in America of cholesterol is chicken because of the volume of chicken. You know, chicken's become grilled chicken and organic chicken. It's machismo, but it has nearly as much cholesterol per gram as red beef. So just on sheer volume, it's the number one source. Yeah, eggs being close behind.
I'd never really thought about eggs much. I just thought of them as a standard part of a healthy diet. But then I found a study suggesting that eating just 1 egg a day can be as bad as smoking 5 cigarettes per day for life expectancy.
The yolk of a hen's egg is the most concentrated glom of saturated fat and cholesterol. It is made to run a baby chicken for 21 days with no outside energy. It is pure fat and cholesterol. And when we put that into our bloodstream, it coats our red blood cells. Our blood gets thicker and more viscous. It changes our hormone levels. It raises our cholesterol levels. There's nothing healthy about eating the yolk of the egg.
But I thought cholesterol and saturated fat wasn't an issue anymore.
You know, these saturated fat studies that have come out trying to vindicate saturated fat, this is a campaign by the dairy industry, right? Number one source of saturated fat is dairy. It's not meat. 2008, the global dairy industry got together at a meeting and explicitly, read their agenda, was to neutralize the negative impact of milk fat by regulators and medical professionals, unquote. So what did? They funded studies.
The main study that started the whole saturated fat media craze was funded by the National Dairy Council. The egg industry similarly funds studies that confuse consumers by making claims that eggs don't negatively affect heart function. That is, only when compared to eating a McDonald's sausage McMuffin? So what they're really saying is that eating eggs is just as bad as eating a McMuffin.
When you eat foods like beef or steak or a processed meat, a hot dog, you're not just getting saturated fat. You're also getting other additional toxins that are in that food. There's heme iron, carcinogens, processing chemicals. This is all a lot more complicated than just looking at saturated fat.
I really don't think people thought what they ate led to heart disease. They think, oh, it's genetic, my parents had it. And I don't think people really think that what they ate led to diabetes. I think, oh, my parents had it, I was going to get it. And certainly cancer, they don't think that way.
People have bad lifestyles that they've inherited environmentally. They've been exposed to a certain way of eating and living that they've carried on into their adulthood, passed on to their children. That is why they go on to develop the same diseases that their parents and grandparents may have had before them. But it is not inevitable.
Even if you have a genetic predisposition, doesn't mean it's going to necessarily manifest. And what determines whether it manifests or not, maybe those epigenetic variables, the things that you can control, the environmental factors, the dietary factors, the lifestyle factors.
So we can actually change the expression of genes, tumor-suppressing genes, tumor-activating genes, by what we eat, what we put into our body. So, even if you've been dealt a bad genetic deck, you can still reshuffle it with diet.
I had always thought that I would develop heart disease at a young age because both my dad and grandpa had heart attacks. I was taught that they were genetic, but their heart attacks probably had less to do with genes and more to do with their diets high in meat. That's why when I went on the American Heart Association's Heart Healthy Recipes page, I could not believe they had an entire section on beef recipes. This was just like the American Cancer Society encouraging eating Group 1 carcinogens on their site.
Meatloaf, pork loin, steak on your recipe list? Are you kidding me? It's like this menu is trying to give people heart attacks. At your website, we noticed Heart Healthy Recipes, and we were kind of bewildered by why there's a bunch of recipes on a whole section on beef recipes, and there's also a section on egg recipes when there's such a strong link between beef, red meat, and heart disease.
I honestly don't know because I don't do that, I guess. That's not what I do.
Another organization rep that wasn't able to answer my questions, but he said that he'd have someone get in touch shortly. I was, however, able to talk to the president of the American College of Cardiology, Dr. Kim Williams.
And if you look at the incidence of hypertension and diabetes and mortality in men, they actually get reduced as you go higher and higher in terms of how much you restrict animal products.
What about fish?
So fish is a little different. You've got the 4 worries, which is PCBs, mercury, saturated fat, and cholesterol. And the cholesterol is all over the place. You can hit tuna in water, that'll be almost less than a glass of milk, to salmon or tilapia, which is higher than a pork chop.
If you look objectively at fish, what you find is they've become essentially mercury sponges. And that's why in many parts of the country they warn you, don't have more than so many of these fish a week because it's getting too much mercury can kill you.
Fish are eaten by bigger fish who are eaten by bigger fish, and these pesticides and herbicides bioaccumulate in the fish flesh. And these big fish, including the salmon, which people think is the healthiest fish, truth is the amount of pesticides and herbicides in the flesh of these fish are shocking, and they have estrogenic and cancer-promoting properties in them.
They'll say, well, but don't sardines have less concentration of toxic waste product than other ones? Something being less toxic doesn't make it healthy.
Most of your exposure, 93% of it, comes from eating meat and dairy products because it climbs up in the food chain so effectively. So you can get exposed to living near these incinerators and breathing it, but it'll take you 14 years to breathe in as much dioxin as a cow will ingest by eating the grass in one day. And that dioxin will accumulate in its fat, which includes the milk and the meat, and anyone eating meat or dairy products is going to get that dose of dioxin, so it climbs up the food chain every step. Men have no way in their bodies to get rid of dioxins, but women have two ways. They're both involving having a baby. One is that dioxin crosses the placenta into the growing infant, and the other is that it comes out from the breast milk. So if you have a meat and dairy consuming mother breastfeeding that infant, then the highest impacts of toxic exposure like mercury and dioxins will go to that infant.
Pregnant women are told, oh, certain types of fish should be avoided. But what about all these other animal products which are introducing, imagine as the fetus is developing, introducing these very harmful toxins which create reproductive abnormalities, developmental problems, and hormonal issues right as the child is developing, the most critical stage of development.
It does make you worry when people say, don't you want to have a little bit of milk because you're pregnant? Don't you want to have some fish because you're pregnant? Who do you think is going to get the chemicals that are in that?
All these environmental toxins and toxins from the feed that they're being fed accumulate in their tissues and are released into the mother and unfortunately to the child when you eat these products when you're pregnant. So this includes antibiotics, hormones, steroids in animal feed. Commercial animals are largely fed GMO corn and soy, which are very laden in pesticides. PCBs have been banned since the 70s, but they persist in the environment. Dioxins, all of these compounds can create hormonal, reproductive, developmental damage as well.
Eating organic beef, poultry, pork, or fish will not help you avoid contaminants like mercury, like dioxins, like strontium-90, because they fall out over all sorts of farm fields and water bodies, and they don't skip over the organic fields. And so really the contaminants are coming in regardless of how these animals are raised.
I had always been concerned about the possible health impacts of GMOs, but then found out that most of the world's GMO crops are actually consumed by livestock, with dairy cows consuming the most per animal. This fact, with everything I'd learned about bioaccumulation, made dairy terrifying, especially considering how much cheese I ate in my life.
Cheese is an amazing product when you think about it. It's probably one of the single best foods at compromising health that you're going to actually feed to people. Think about it. You've got an animal product, so you've got all the issues of biological concentration. You have a highly processed food product, and not only does it have naturally a lot of saturated fat, but you put a lot of salt into it.
There's a strong link between dairy foods and autoimmune diseases, and so that can show itself up as excessive production of mucus and exacerbation of asthma in kids who are prone to that, and even adults. And also there's an association between dairy foods and multiple sclerosis and type 1 diabetes, which is an autoimmune disease, and other rheumatologic problems.
Cow's milk is baby calf growth fluid. That's what the stuff is. There's absolutely no child or human on earth who actually needs the milk of a cow any more than they need the milk of a giraffe or a mouse.
Most people in the world are lactose intolerant. I mean, that's the normal state of affairs. Why would your body create this enzyme to digest lactose after weaning, after infancy? It doesn't make any sense.
73% of African Americans are lactose intolerant, 95% of Asians, roughly 70% of Native Americans and about 53% of Hispanic Americans are lactose intolerant. Our government is encouraging Americans of color to eat foods that it knows is going to make them ill. Ultimately, what that boils down to is the government is telling me as an African American to eat food that's going to make me ill for no health benefit so that it will benefit dairy farmers as a form of institutionalized racism.
Yeah, milk is a risky food for human consumption. As a pediatrician, I see on a daily basis children suffering from conditions that are linked or associated to dairy consumption, such as eczema, acne, constipation, acid reflux, iron deficiency, anemia. Cow's milk protein is the most allergenic food.
People think, well, no, I want hormone-free, not injected with bovine growth hormone. But milk is this hormonal fluid, so it's just packed with sex hormones and natural sex steroid hormones like estrogen, progesterone. In fact, doesn't matter if it's conventional milk, doesn't matter if it's organic milk. Milk without hormones, that's an oxymoron. Organic dairy has just as much saturated fat and cholesterol and galactose and all the things that you don't want as conventional dairy.
Dairy products in general have a lot of other products associated with it, not the least of which is pus. I mean, they actually have laws limiting how much pus you can actually have in a milk and still sell it. I believe it's like 750,000 pus cells per cc. Because, I mean, you wouldn't want too much pus and it would be like pure pus. People might object. In fact, you could think of cheese as kind of coagulated cow pus, if you would.
But I was always told that we need milk for strong bones.
Milk does not build strong bones. Harvard researchers have looked at a large group of older women. Over an 18-year period, the milk drinkers had zero protection from fractures. So this old notion that somehow milk is going to build strong bones or protect your bones later in life, it's a myth.
People that drink milk have higher rates of hip fractures, have more cancer, and live shorter lives.
It turns out that countries with the highest dairy consumption also have the highest rates of osteoporosis, so clearly drinking more milk doesn't protect your bones. Doing more research, I found that dairy was linked to many different types of cancer as well. Just like many of us, I thought that the majority of cancer was due to genes, but only 5 to 10% of cancer is actually genetic.
Any cancer is caused by a DNA mutation, but that's not enough. So that can cause that first cancer cell, but one cancer cell never killed anyone. 2 cancer cells never killed anyone. But 1 billion cancer cells, now we're running into problems. So we need to reduce the growth factors in our body, like IGF-1. Insulin-like growth factor 1 is this cancer-promoting growth hormone involved in every stage of cancer cell growth and spread and metastases. Any animal protein boosts the level of IGF-1.
Dairy products increases your risk for various forms of cancer, especially those related to your hormones. So breast cancer, prostate cancer, ovarian cancer. So this is not a product, even in its most pure state, you want to be consuming because it does come with risk.
I found out that dairy can increase a man's chance of getting prostate cancer by 34%. And for women who've had breast cancer, just 1 serving of whole dairy a day can increase their chance of dying from the disease 49%, and dying from anything 64%. Why weren't breast cancer sites like Susan G. Komen warning everyone about this?
For calling Susan G. Komen, this is Jocelyn. How may I help you?
Okay, so we're wondering why you don't have a huge warning about the dangers of consuming dairy on your website when there's a direct link to breast cancer. There was a study published in the Journal of the National Cancer Institute that found out women consuming dairy who has had breast cancer increases their risk of dying of breast cancer 49%. I was wondering why it's not on your website.
We cannot answer these types of questions.
Once again, another health organization rep saying someone else would have to answer my question. Rather than risk being stood up again, I went straight to the local Susan G. Komen chapter to see if they would answer my questions. They didn't want to answer my questions in person either, and told us to stop filming, but promised they would connect me to the national office directly.
It turns out that the casein protein, that's the main protein in dairy products, and particularly in cheese, it breaks apart in the human digestion to create what are called casomorphins, casein-derived morphine-like compounds that go to the brain, and they attach to the very same receptor that heroin attaches to. Don't get me wrong, they're not as strong as that, but they are strong enough to make you come back again and again and again, despite the fact that you're gaining weight, you're more unhealthy than you've ever been, but that cheese just calls out to people.
Casomorphin may play a role in SIDS and sudden infant death syndrome, may play a role in autism. This is one of the reasons why we don't want infants drinking milk from cows.
Human breast milk has 2.7 grams of casein per liter, compared to 26 grams per liter for cow's milk. That's practically 10 times more. No wonder it's so addictive. This talk about addiction made me think about all the drugs animals are fed. I had always thought there was no prevention for type 1 diabetes, but then I did research and came across countless studies referencing the link between exposure to dairy at a young age and type 1 diabetes.
I mean, this is a food made for baby cows. Cow milk protein gets into the bloodstream, and the body says, hey, this isn't supposed to be in the bloodstream. It makes antibodies to the cow milk protein, which then attack the pancreas and destroy the pancreas.
So checkoff programs are responsible for the messages that we see on TV, on the internet, on bus billboards and magazines that say things like, milk, it does a body good, or milk life. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Pork, be inspired. the incredible edible egg.
The dairy checkoff program gave $12 million to Domino's to just market cheese-heavy products. And this is the USDA, this is the government. If you've seen those ads for the Pizza Hut pizza, the stuffed crust, or a pound of cheese, those are all government advertising schemes for the industry. How can we put more cheese on beef? How can we put more milk in a coffee? Things like that. Cheese, bacon double cheeseburger. Government program. The steak fajita at Dunkin' Donuts. Government program. You would just never think that this just pure garbage from a food standpoint is coming from a federally funded program.
That's one of the things that makes checkoffs so incredibly creepy, is that it is our government telling us, eat more beef, drink more milk, eat more cheese, eat more pork. One of the very effective ways that the dairy industry promotes its products is to reach children, because kids are impressionable, they're going to be consumers for their entire lives, and you might as well get them while they're young. So dairy spends at least $50 million promoting its products in public schools throughout the country, with posters with people with milk mustaches and messages like milk, it does a body good, or milk life.
If the Surgeon General puts warning labels on tobacco because of their cancer risk, why aren't the same warning labels on meat?
The meat producers don't have to pay for the heart disease or the environmental destruction or any of the other externalities, as economists call them, that their products cause.
Testing shows 88% of pork chops are contaminated with fecal bacteria, 90% of ground beef, and 95% of chicken breast sample contain animal waste bacteria. There is nothing clean about eating this way. But it just isn't waste, it's also pus-filled infections.
You can see there's a bump or some kind of abscess underneath the hide. Most of the time when the hide's pulled off, either that will open up the abscess and the pus will come out, or if it's deep-seated, when the inspectors are doing their work or the company employees, they might stick their knife into an abscess and it explodes all over the place.
I had heard enough. I was utterly disgusted by the corruption, the greed, the disease, and the abuse I was learning about. The very animals we were killing us and the planet. But so many people eat meat and dairy every day of their lives, and we are so concerned about getting enough protein.
Do we have to eat meat to get complete protein?
Oh my God. Oh my God. You want me to jump off this building, don't you? No. Well, first of all protein is made by plants. I'll state that again for the record. All protein is initially made by plants. All of it. And it is not necessary to eat animal tissue in order to get protein. Only plants have the ability to actually take nitrogen from the air, break those molecules apart, and incorporate that nitrogen into amino acids and then make protein. Any protein you get from an animal is simply recycled plant protein.
If you ate a diet that was calorically adequate, and even things like brown rice and broccoli, and you got enough of it, you'd get enough both quantity and quality of protein. 2,000 calories of brown rice and broccoli is going to be about 80 grams of protein a day, including the essential amino acids that you need in order to maintain optimum health.
I mean, grains are loaded with protein. Beans are loaded with protein. Vegetables are loaded with protein.
You really want to get your protein from plants because plant proteins have a much more beneficial effect on our physiology.
The funny thing about protein is most Americans get about twice the amount they need. Most Americans get less than half the amount of fiber they need. But the conversation tends to always be about protein. So in my mind, it's just this magical marketing campaign that protein has taken on over the decades.
The question is not where do you get your protein, it's where do you get your fiber?
I have never in my professional career seen a protein deficiency. I've never seen someone come in eating normal amounts of calories and they're protein deficient. You just don't see that.
So human milk has the lowest protein content ever in any species ever tested. I mean, that's the fluid that's been designed by evolution over millions of years. And that's just like the perfect food for human babies, right? Perfect food, lowest protein content any other mammal. And so it gives a sense of kind of protein requirements for food. Anything. So look, then rat milk, ape milk, donkey milk, any milk has ever been tested.
And you hear this a lot in bodybuilders. They're like, well, I need, chicken, or I need fish to be, to be strong, to build muscle tissue. That is utter nonsense. The largest, strongest terrestrial animals on the planet are all herbivores. The biggest, strongest animals are all herbivores.
The food you eat determines the bacteria that live in your gut. Well, you eat animal flesh every day. You are summoning up bacteria that eat carnitine, and those bacteria will turn that carnitine into a molecule called trimethylamine. Your liver then turns that into trimethylamine oxide. That's a molecule from hell. That molecule drives cholesterol into the artery walls, and the people who are consuming this flesh-based diet are contributing to plaque building up. They may lose weight on this diet, and that's good, but what's happening inside your arteries, paleo friends? What's happening is that plaque is building up, and these are the folks who drop dead at the gym at 39. Boy, he was lean and he looked really good. But where is that cholesterol going? It's going into your artery walls. So I believe these paleo folks are setting themselves up for an epidemic of clogged arteries, colon cancers, autoimmune diseases. This is not a healthy diet. We are not carnivorous apes.
Humans' closest living relatives are chimps, who get 97% of their calories from plants and the remaining 3% mostly from insects. Comparing the anatomy of true omnivores like bears, who eat both meat and plants, to frugivores like primates, who eat almost exclusively plants, the differences are pretty clear. Frugivore teeth have flat molars for chewing plants, where omnivore teeth are serrated for stabbing and tearing flesh. Frugivore jaws can move forward and back and side to side. Omnivore jaws cannot. Omnivores have much stronger stomach acid for digesting meat compared to less acidic stomach acid of frugivores. The intestines of frugivores is 9 times their body length compared to 3 times for omnivores. This is because meat will putrefy in the gut unless it is moved through quickly. All these diseases I had learned about were from eating a diet our body wasn't designed for. What would happen if we started eating a diet our body actually was designed for?
The data is crystal clear that you can stop and reverse heart disease with plant-based diets, scientifically shown. I've seen it in my own patients.
People who adopt low-fat plant-based diets can actually reverse their heart disease, and that literally means watching the plaque start to go away, something they didn't think could happen.
My experience with patients is, and those studies show, that when people adopt a fully plant-based diet, their cholesterol levels plummet within a few days. And if you do blood tests in a couple of weeks, you'll see dramatic improvements.
The side effect is not having to take drugs.
In a groundbreaking study published by Dr. Esselstyn following patients suffering from cardiovascular disease, 99.4% were able to avoid major cardiac events by going plant-based.
Because it's not just heart disease. It's hypertension, it's diabetes, it's strokes, it's heart attacks, it's several of the autoimmune diseases, lupus, asthma, GERD, osteoporosis. I mean, there's a multitude of diseases, even rheumatoid arthritis. It can be so dramatic. When you see these poor souls with just absolute crippled with rheumatoid arthritis go plant-based, then they come off their medication.
When you're treating diseases with drugs, you know, there's one drug you take for cholesterol, a different class of drugs you take for high blood pressure, different class of drugs you take for diabetes. But with diet, a plant-based diet affects all these diseases, one diet to kind of rule them all.
Conditions like high blood pressure, you don't have to take the drugs the rest of your life and be sick forever. What you can do is live in such a way that it gives the body a chance to heal itself. We took 174 consecutive patients with high blood pressure, and 174 people were able to lower their blood pressure enough to eliminate the need for medication.
For inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's, the best remission rates ever achieved through a plant-based diet. MS, multiple sclerosis, the best results ever achieved compared to any medical, surgical, any kind of intervention was a plant-based diet.
You can see that with every sequential reduction in animal products, people live longer, they have less heart disease, they have less cancer, they have less diabetes.
You can actually take human cancer cells, you put them in a petri dish, and you can drip the blood of those eating vegan, get about 72% suppression in human prostate cancer cell growth in vitro. They wanted to try this again with women and breast cancer. So they said, let's see what a plant-based diet can do. After just 2 weeks, their body's cleaned up. You drip their blood on the same carpet of cancer cells. You can clear off the whole plate. This is after just 2 weeks eating healthy, which raises the question, what kind of blood do we want in our body?
This was tough to believe. Couldn't this all just be from eating healthier though, like no sugar? Turns out Dr. Walter Kempner from Duke University back in the 1940s was reversing some of our worst killer diseases with diet alone. And the diet he was using was not only strictly plant-based, but it was made up of white rice, fruit, and table sugar.
And he was reversing diabetes, he was reversing malignant hypertension, reversing heart disease, the diabetic complications, reversing diabetic blindness. So these people basically had death sentences, went to him, and were given basically sugar, this horrible diet, but it was strictly plant-based.
If this information had been around since the 1940s, why don't all doctors know this?
We're not taught about the power of food in medical school. No one is taught that the changes that we make with our diet are probably the single most powerful thing we can do to determine our destiny. It trumps our genetics.
Why isn't your doctor telling this?